Bricks and Minifigs is your one-stop shop for all things LEGO. Hit the link below to find a store near you. Hey everyone, Joshua Hamlin here at Brick Fair, Virginia, and today we're taking a look at the experimental military collaboration. These are tons of experimental military aircraft here, lots of incredible stuff to look at. We're going to start off with Jack right here and some of your builds, so if you want to introduce yourself and tell us what you've got.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. This is my XB35, and actually, I guess I'll get started with who I am. My name's Jack Carlson, also known as Big Planes on YouTube, Flickr, Instagram, most of those places. And yes, so this is our experimental military collaboration. It's between me and a number of other builders like Ralph and Yasser and Einon. But yeah, so this stuff at the end here, this is my contribution to the collaboration. I mostly focused on the flying wing aspects of experimental military. And our collaboration covers everything from early year prototype airplanes all the way up to North Korean missile trains. So you'll see some of that later in the collaboration. But this thing here, this is the XB35. So this was more or less the precursor to the B-2 Spirit. And this was developed back in the 1940s. So a long time ago. It was Jack Northrup's sort of baby, if you will. And this thing's really interesting. It has a really interesting history because it was super efficient. His idea was to more or less get rid of the fuselage in the design, get rid of everything other than the wing, because the wing is, at least in theory, the most efficient design. So this is what they came up with, and it is full minifigure scale, has working motors, so those motors do contra-rotate. In fact, I can demonstrate that for you right now if we want to show that. So it's just a basic power functions control, so you can see that they can spin up on both sides. This one here, like that. And I have them running at low speed right now just to preserve battery, but yes, those were very tricky to install because I had to basically fix the motor inside the wing and have axles and U-joints and everything running around, and I had to all keep that within the wing. But back to the design of this plane back in the 1940s, it was needed, or it was really developed because the Allies, or the United States, was worried about losing their air bases in England because they thought that the Nazis might invade and they would lose those air bases. So a proposal was put out to develop a bomber that could basically fly from the mainland United States all the way to Germany and back. So this was one of the proposals. This was Northrop's proposal, and Convair also had a proposal that ended up becoming the B-36 Peacemaker. So yes, it's a very bizarre airplane. When people see it, most people don't really know what it is because a lot of people confuse it with the B-2. It was more or less the predecessor. This was the first iteration of the Northrop Flying Wing back in the 1940s. It had contra-rotating propellers, and which were just maintenance hogs. They were very hard to deal with. They constantly broke down. So after a few flights that were not overly successful, the Air Force, or Northrop, switched to single propellers. And those were better in terms of efficiency, but they could not meet the performance that they required. So eventually, after more test flights, they switched to jet engines, and that became the YB-49, which a lot more people are familiar with than the XB-35. But the YB-49 had to compete now against the planes like the B-52, and it just couldn't meet the same performance standards as the B-52 because it had initially been designed with propellers. And another thing I guess I'll point out is that this had stability issues because this was well before any fly-by-wire technology. So this was all manual control, and it was very difficult for pilots to control it because it's just a wing. They have very little control authority pretty much anywhere else. So it was pretty tricky to fly. It wasn't the most stable bombing platform, and it just, the combination of issues and some Air Force politics that I'm not going to get too deep into. The program got canceled in the late 1940s, and unfortunately all remaining examples of it were scrapped, which is just a shame because it's such a unique aircraft. So yeah, that's the YB, or the XB-35.
That's a fantastic model there. Such a bizarre aircraft, like you said.
It also has an interior here, not much of an inside, but I guess I can show you anyway. This little thing here pops right off, and we have the pilot up here. This might be a little hard for you guys to see, but under here there is a co-pilot, and I believe this is the either radar or bombardier or whatever. Or no, sorry, my bad. The bombardier actually would lay down right here in this clear area. So he would actually lay on his stomach and look down out of these windows right here to try to line up the bomb sights. And of course, the seat in the corner there, that is the flight engineer, because this was a prop-driven aircraft. They needed a flight engineer to manage the 4 R-4360. These are massive radial engines that were built into the wing, which made them very hard to service. So yeah, and in the very back there would be a gunner. I don't have any guns in this one because it was a prototype, but that's where the gunner would be on this. So a very quirky aircraft, I will say, and I wanted to really capture the quirkiness of it, which I think I did pretty well here.
Excellent work, but you've got some other models here as well, so tell us what else you've brought.
Oh yeah, so I also have a little bit more history on the flying wings just overall. So the one in the front here, this is the HO229. This is the German design for a flying wing. It was being developed during the Second World War, and the goal of this was to meet the 3/1000s requirements. So 1,000 kilometers per hour, traveled over 1,000 kilometers, carrying 1,000 kilograms, I believe, of bombs. And so this was being developed during the Second World War because of Allied bomber raids and all those other things that never really was finished, and we only have chunks of it now. We don't actually have the full aircraft, although I believe they are trying to restore one at the local air museum here. But I guess this has a couple features I can show you. So the landing gear on this do function. It folds in. It's a very simple system, but it works. So these fold in like this, like that. And then the oversized nose gear just folds straight in like that. So that's how that works. Very, very sleek model. I really like the look of this one. I basically designed it around these 2 cylinder pieces in the front here. And so yeah, this has turned out very nicely. And I've been building for this collaboration since 2019. So we were supposed to have this collaboration back in 2020, but it kind of got delayed a little bit. And then it got delayed to 2021, 2022, and so now we're finally having it in 2023.
Nice. This is excellent work here. With these aircraft, I know you said there aren't like kind of existing examples of them still today, but are there blueprints and plans for these? How did you kind of map these out?
Oh yeah, so there are blueprints for pretty much all of these. We know a lot about this one because we were able to find a lot of schematics about it, and we even found some examples of the aircraft in Germany after the war. This one's was a little harder to build based off of the source material because there just wasn't as much, whereas this one back here, I guess we'll transition to the N9 now. This is the Northrop N9, which is a 1/3 scale prototype of the XB-35. It was basically a test aircraft to see if the flying wing could even work, pretty much, and it did. So after they tested this one, they tried the bigger one, and this one's really interesting because I just really liked the yellow color scheme on this one, and I wanted to really try to show that in Lego. And it's very smooth. It almost kind of looks like a banana or a boomerang. And so yeah, it also has retractable landing gear. This one's a little harder to do because I have to dig it out of there with my fingers when it's done, but it goes all the way in like that. Closes up. Nose gear just goes in pretty simple. So yeah, I'm happy with how this one turned out because I did not have a lot of room to work with in the wing on this because, again, it's basically just a wing. So, but yeah, in fact, they actually flew one of these up until a few years ago when, unfortunately, it crashed, which they probably shouldn't have been flying it. They weren't exactly known as being the most stable designs, considering this was well before the fly-by-wire technology that was really needed to fly these things existed. So, yeah, this was an interesting one, and they had a few of these, I'm pretty sure. There is still a surviving example at the Udvar Hazy Museum here in Dulles, so I think that is something that everybody should see. It's definitely worth seeing.
Very close to where Brick Fair happens. If you're ever in town for Brick Fair, it's very, very close by.
Yeah, so it looks just like this. Bright yellow aircraft, hard to miss it. So yeah, this was definitely the predecessor to the much larger one, and these were more or less, not exactly, but developed close to the same time periods as each other. One in the U.S. by the Northrop Company, Jack Northrop specifically, and one in Germany by the Horten brothers. So I really wanted to show sort of the dual development of the flying wings. And speaking of dual development, I guess we'll move on to really the last display here. Those 2 little ones in the back, which I'm going to have a hard time reaching from here, but those were the first jet aircraft ever. So the one on the right is the Heinkel HE-178. That was the first airplane to fly using jet propulsion. This was in pre-war Germany, and it was really more of a pet project. In fact, the Nazi government at the time was not even very interested in it. They were not impressed, but this really was the basis for every other jet aircraft to pretty much ever follow, and it was definitely the basis for the ME-262 that would follow later. So it's a very interesting history. It's not the most interesting aircraft, but it's a very interesting history. And the British one right there, that is the Gloster E-28 Pioneer. That was basically Frank Whittles who designed the British jet engine. That was his design. And he eventually, after enough lobbying, got the British government to help support his projects, and that was the eventual design for the first British jet plane. So yeah, that's basically going to cover all of my models here. I tried to focus on early war stuff and things that were basically the development of how we got things like the B-2 and jet aircraft overall. So yeah, I'm happy I was able to share this with you guys.
Thank you so much. Excellent work there. We'll keep making our way down the row here to some of these other aircraft. So I think we've got another builder who's ready to come in here. If you want to introduce yourself and then tell us what you've got.
Awesome. So my name is Yasser Moran, and I built some of these planes here on the end. All right. First thing we've got here, this is the RAH-66 Comanche. It was a conceptual stealth and attack and reconnaissance helicopter. This one's built in minifigure scale, just like the other models in this collaboration. It's got a nice sleek body because it was intended to kind of reflect all the radar waves and be a stealth helicopter, but the project was canceled because it was just over budget, just too expensive and not worth it anymore for the Army. So moving on, we've got the Lockheed Have-Blue technology demonstrator, which was the precursor to the F-117 Nighthawk, which is like an infamous diamond-shaped stealth aircraft. The reason it has such an intricate shape is because it's also intended to bounce a lot of the radar waves off. And this color scheme was kind of an experimental camouflage. And here it's shown on a runway, kind of just like for testing. Because it was tested in Nevada, it kind of has like a desert background. And then the last and final thing I built for this collaboration was this, the Boeing X-51 Wave Rider, which was a technology demonstrator for hypersonics. Basically, it's a missile that can go at Mach 5, at least Mach 5, and this test for this aircraft made it reach Mach 5.1. It's kind of boosted by a rocket booster, here the gray part with the fins on it, and then once it gets up to speed, the scramjet will activate, and the scramjet is just like an air-breathing engine that can make the aircraft go past Mach 5. So yeah.
Incredible work here. I really love this helicopter, especially kind of the cockpit area. Talk a little bit more about kind of the pieces and the design there.
Yeah. So that was the hardest part for sure. There's a lot of strange techniques which, involved me building like segments of the cockpit and, just differently. Here you have like a straight section, and then there's this weird kind of area right here where the cheese slopes are able to fit together just perfectly, and I think that kind of makes it.
My name's Tyler from Dallas, Georgia. It's my AH-56 Cheyenne. This was a prototype helicopter in the 60s. Eventually led to the Apache helicopter, but it was an interesting helicopter because it had a rigid rotor and these small stub wings, and it could fly at almost 400 kilometers an hour. And at those high speeds, it actually performed like a plane. And this particular one was when they tested it in the desert to fire anti-tank missiles. So in that test, the missile failed and it just dropped to the ground. But yeah, that's about it.
What are some of the tough design elements of a helicopter like this?
Particularly, I'll show you. They get that sweep on the wing. The wings angle up to create more lift just because of the way this plane flies. And then, of course, the canopy. Getting that kind of Vietnam-era war canopy with a significant amount of bracing, as the glass just wasn't as strong then. And of course, at those high speeds, if the canopy wasn't heavily reinforced, it would just collapse. So other than that, it wasn't too challenging other than just getting that sweep on the wings just correct. So,
are there any existing examples of this still today, or was it all scrapped?
They made 10 total units. 2 of them crashed, and 8 of them are still around today in various museums. Okay. And they did keep it in testing for a while to test the high-speed helicopter characteristics. But by like 1975, all of them were no longer flying. So,
good work. Thank you for your contribution.
Alrighty, thank you.
I'll go next. So, hi everyone, I'm Aynen, and this time I brought 3 different planes. The first one Just come closer. It's this plane here. It's the Soko Novo Avião. I'll grab it for a moment. Just grab it. Okay, so this plane was made in the former Yugoslavia. So the Yugoslavian country existed during the 50s, during the Cold War. And their main goal was to develop a fourth-generation fighter. They wanted to become self-sufficient in terms of developing indigenous aircrafts. So they made this aircraft, which was their attempt to make some sort of an Aero Canard. And we are combined the Canards aircraft projects here. And yeah, it was one of their most promising designs. The model features a retractable landing gear. The issue was they never had enough money to develop the aircraft, and then the former Soviet Union just fell apart, and they also fell apart soon after, leading to the awful Yugoslavian civil war. And their factory was destroyed, and they never were able to finish the aircraft. I think they started making the cockpit, but they never finished the overall design. They even asked the French for help. They tried to develop a single-engine variant of the Dassault Rafale, which was also called the Novi Avion, but I tried to follow the more indigenous design, the more original one. In here I have two more designs. This one was the Fokker D-23, which was the Dutch attempt to make a new self-sufficient fighter aircraft. It first flew in 1949. So at that moment, the Dutch were neutral. They didn't have access to any sort of modern fighter aircraft. So they decided to develop this aircraft. And it's a push and pull aircraft. So it has one engine on the front and one in the rear.
That's a bizarre looking design there.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure, but it was the only. There were more designs like this, but they were never very successful. Same thing as the next plane that I'll present after, because normally the rear engine suffers of heavy heating problems. They are never able to fully cool them. So yeah, the model features a full retractable landing gear, like this one. And it was a very interesting design, but then the Germans invaded in 1940. The plane had a crash shortly before the invasion, and it never entered in production, which was a pity. Next one is an American aircraft with a very patriotic scheme with the stripes on the end. This is a Bell Aracuda. At the time, they made lots of promotion with some very interesting and very beautiful design pictures of the model. The idea is this is something like a flying destroyer. It had two massive 37mm cannons on the nose, and the idea was to intercept bombers that could approach the United States. So it didn't need to be very maneuverable, because there were no escort fighters that could cross the Atlantic, and it was designed during the time that the radar wasn't a thing at the time. Thing is, this was in terms of maintenance, it was a nightmare. It was very difficult to fly, and you have three nacelles. The pilot was here, and there were two gunners flying on these nacelles, and if they had to fire the guns, it could get everything inside full of fumes, and they will get intoxicated. And if you need to leave the plane, you also have to push your engines behind you, so you would get shredded completely the moment that you come out. So that led to the development of some ejection seats by everyone that was developing planes with pusher engines. They had to start developing some sort of ejection devices. Otherwise, it will be crazy for the pilots. Yeah, and it features like a retractable landing gear here in the rear as well. And it's one of those planes that I always wanted to make, and this was the perfect opportunity to test and made the design. So hope you guys like it.
Excellent work. Thank you. Appreciate it.
I'm Ralph Savelsberg, or Mad Physicist on Flickr, and it's good to see you guys again. Yeah, we're at BrickFair after a long delay, because this is the experimental military collaboration. I don't know whether any of the other guys already talked about how this came about.
Jack mentioned it was a few years in the making.
Yeah, so we were here, most of us were here in 2019, and we got really excited about doing something collaboratively. 2019 we had the Cold War collaboration, which you guys featured And the year before, you had the Vietnam collaboration, which you also showed.
For people who haven't seen those videos, incredible builds there. Definitely check that out.
And we thought, this is fun, right? Getting together from all over the place and doing a sort of joint theme. So what are we going to do next year? Okay, well, experimental military builds, because they are unusual and weird, and everybody builds like an F-16, but nobody builds an F-16 prototype. Or, well, some people do, but they're rare, right? And then, of course, the pandemic happened, so no Brick Fair in 2020. 2021, there was a Brick Fair, but us Europeans couldn't enter the country. And then 2022, I couldn't make it. And I built, I think, 11 of the models, so if I wouldn't, with me not there, the display would be half the size. So, and here I am. And
it's finally happening.
Yeah, and it's so much fun. Of course, all my other friends are slackers, right? They had 4 years and they didn't actually. No, I'm joking. So I have. Let's just go over them. So that thing, that is an X-47B, and that is an unmanned aircraft that was used to test aircraft carrier operations with unmanned vehicles, so without a pilot. And that's what it was for. So it did unmanned landings, unmanned takeoffs from aircraft carriers, and that technology is now being used for the sort of next generation of unmanned aircraft that will serve the U.S. Navy.
Very unique shape and kind of design there with that one.
It's certainly I think it's the oddest shape that I've built in years, there were definitely some challenges. It's very like a manta ray sort of thing, and now as it's sitting here, the outer wing panels are folded. They do unfold, so then it becomes more of a flying wing, which is why we placed it next to the flying wings. And it's an unusual thing.
Can you fold the wings down there?
Hang on, there we go. So yeah, I can't reach the other one from here, but
a little playability there.
Yeah, and the undercarriage retracts, and demonstrations, you know how that goes. It'll break, but it always works at home. It doesn't work on shows. So that's the first one, and then I think one of the more spectacular ones is this, and this is. Well, a lot of people know the SR-71 Blackbird, right? There's one in the Udvarhazy Center just a couple of miles from here. But this is the experimental military collaboration. So this is not just your bog standard SR-71. This is called the M21. And this was a version that was used to launch a Mach 3 unmanned reconnaissance drone from its back. It's very G.I. Joe. Of course, it's G.I. Joe who took the inspiration in this project. The real plane is in Seattle in the Museum of Flight, where I saw it years ago, so it's a Blackbird with a drone, and it's not black, which upsets some people. Your Blackbird's not black. Yes, I know. That's why I picked this one. I'm very happy with the shape of the Blackbird is quite complicated, and there are a lot of pretty good Blackbird models out there, even Blackbird models that you can buy by other builders. But I wanted to have a new twist, so hence this version.
You got the little baby plane on top there, so very unique as well.
Yeah, especially if you look at it from a lower angle, where the children who come here are, it looks pretty menacing with this sort of thing poking out at the top.
I talk about some of the design challenges with this one because there are some difficult shapes in there.
The first challenge is getting it here, because it's actually longer than the length of my suitcase. So it's actually designed with this collaboration in mind. So it comes apart after the canopy, and to get that strong enough, that was a challenge. The cockpit is very small, but it does seat minifig pilots. That was difficult. There's also a very gentle transition in the width from 12 studs to the narrow tip, and making that curve nice and smooth. That was difficult. A good friend of mine from the UK, whom you may have met, Ed Diamond, built a Blackbird years ago, and he came up with a way to use wedge plates that with a half stud offset combined to give you that curve, and that's what I did. But that does mean that it goes from 12 studs to 11 studs at some point, and making that structurally sound was difficult. Then the nacelles, the engine housings, they're not cylinders. They are, the diameter is not the same across their length, so it tapers, it curves down slightly towards the front. You know,
They just had to make it hard for you.
yeah, well, fun. I mean, if it works, right? So yeah, this was it was a challenging build, but I mean, if it were easy, you know, it wouldn't be as fun.
There you go. It looks fantastic.
I appreciate it, and I like that. It also with the black tablecloth. Really happy that I didn't pick a black one. And then we go to the black one. So experimental military, right? So that thing is called the X20 Dinosaur, which stands for dynamic soaring. So it's not obviously it's not a pterodactyl or whatever. And this was a concept for a military space shuttle way back in the late 50s and early 60s. So this was supposed to be launched on top of a missile and carry an astronaut. And a funny detail or interesting detail, Neil Armstrong, the first man to walk the moon, was one of the astronauts initially selected to fly Dinosaur. But I think the idea was a bit ahead of its time. It was technologically very challenging, and it was easier to get a man in space just in a capsule on top of a missile. So the program was cancelled in the early 60s when they were building prototypes. So this represents one of those prototypes. And then we go to a real life military space vehicle, because this is the X-37B orbital test vehicle, and that is currently in service with the U.S. Space Force. It's also launched on top of a rocket, and I think there have been 6 missions so far. The longest duration flight was 909 days, so one of these has been circling around the Earth for almost 3 years. And the official role is it's intended to develop new technology for space exploration. And you shouldn't believe everything you read on the internet, of course, but there are conspiracy theories about this thing. One thing is clear, there are people who observe satellites in orbit using telescopes, and they keep track of where these things go. And there's on some of these missions, on some of their missions, X-37Bs have been observed to change their orbit. They have a rocket engine for that, obviously. And that suggests that they have a role in which they occasionally have to overfly a different part of the Earth. So it might have a reconnaissance role. So I know what it looks like from the outside. I know some of the technology, but what's inside is, you know, that's classified, and I wouldn't know. And,
It's not a cool experimental vehicle without some fun conspiracy theories to go along with it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, sure. Right, aliens. I don't know. Right, that's a big thing right now in the U.S. Actually, I enjoyed building the support vehicles for it as well. This thing is propelled by something called hypergolic propellant, which is rocket fuel and rocket oxidizer that react spontaneously when they are combined. It's really nice if you want to build a rocket engine that restarts.
I'll keep that in mind. Little pro tip.
No, yeah. But it is really, really volatile and carcinogenic, and the sort of stuff that will dissolve your lungs if you were to breathe it in. So after landing, this thing is defueled by a bunch of guys wearing hazmat suits, and until a couple of years ago, I didn't do minifig scale builds. And now I spend myself browsing the internet to find the right pieces to build a dude in a hazmat suit. But it adds a bit of life to the display, So this was a fun build.
Excellent.
I guess you don't get rocket signs on Beyond the Brick very often.
Not super often, no.
No, but we're in Northern Virginia, right? So what do you expect? Because I've built a train, but with a rocket.
Of course.
And this comes close to the sort of thing I do for a living, actually. This is a North Korean train, which they. I mean, North Korea is in the news a lot because of their missile launches, and one of the things they seem to want to portray is that if there were a war with the U.S. or with South Korea or with Japan, that they would be able to hit these countries with their missiles. And that obviously means that they should prevent those missiles from being destroyed on the ground. And one way in which you can do that is by driving them around on a truck or by hiding them in tunnels. And the North Koreans in September 2021 did a test with a new delivery vehicle, a train. They have an extensive railway network. If you look at this thing, there's a diesel engine built in the Soviet Union. The second car is a freight car which they imported from China. It's a bog standard freight car. But the third car, when it's all buttoned up, looks like a bog standard freight car. Don't know whether bog standard is actually an expression that means anything to your viewers, but standard, you know.
I'm just gonna roll with it.
But it looks, when buttoned up, it looks like a freight car, but it actually carries 2 ballistic missiles. So the roof opens, and one is now in vertical position. There's another one next to it, which can also be raised. And they demonstrated this. They launched 2 of these missiles from a train, and that means that you don't see any freight train in North Korea could potentially house ballistic missiles. So if you want to stop them from being launched on the ground, you have a challenge. And that's the idea behind this concept.
Were there other countries that have done a similar idea with trains in the past, or was this kind of a unique thing?
The Soviet Union had even larger missiles that they launched from trains, and actually the United States came pretty close. So in the late 80s, early 90s, they had a program called the Peacekeeper Rail Garrison, which also included building specialized trains that could carry long-range missiles and that would be driving around the country. And that got cancelled when the Cold War ended, which is, probably a good thing. They were huge because they were much larger missiles. This is a relatively short-range missile. I think they fly about 800 or 900 kilometers, so 500 miles. The missiles that were used by the Soviets and that were planned by the United States were intercontinental, right? They could fly from the Soviet Union to the US or vice versa. So much bigger missiles, much bigger trains. Interestingly, yesterday a visitor came here, a mother with her son, and she said she recognized it from kilometers away, from meters away, and she walked up to me and she said, "This is a Soviet train," and I said, "Yeah, well, you're right." She said, "I grew up in the Soviet Union, and we used to take train rides on these trains. I recognized it from the other side of the room." And she said, "Oh," I said, "It's North Korean." She said, "Oh, that makes sense." And she said, "Well, I don't think our trains carried missiles." And I said, "Well, actually, some of yours did."
This is why you have to do your research. You never know when there's a Soviet train expert wandering the hall.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. People come in all sorts, don't they? And I mentioned this is related to the work I do. I work for the Ministry of Defense, and I look at North Korean missile threats, among other things, based on open sources, so I can talk about it.
When you're not building Lego.
When I'm not building Lego, yeah. North Korean missile train. It's not something you see every day.
No, very unique. I love it.
Then we go to some things that are a bit more mainstream, I guess. So these 2 airplanes, they are the YF-23 and the YF-22, and they were, I think, in the 80s, the U.S. Air Force was looking to replace their F-15 fighters, and there were 2 candidates for that replacement. These 2, and there was a competition between the manufacturers who would get the contract, and the YF-23 ended up losing, and the YF-22 ended up winning and became the F-22 Raptor, which is behind it. That's the production version. And I think that is Corvin's, but I'm not quite sure. Because there are a couple others dotted around. So you can see the prototype and the production version side by side, and you can see the differences. Yeah, nobody builds a YF-22. Everybody builds F-22s, so here it is.
What are some of the significant differences between the finished aircraft and the prototype there?
Yeah, apart from the color scheme, obviously, you can see that the wing plan form, the shape of the wings and the shape of the tail fins is a bit different. So that's immediately noticeable. But the configuration of the undercarriage is very different, and that's not something I can easily show you. Well, I can show you on mine if I'm brave. So this is the main gear, and on the prototype version, which this represents, the wheels fold forward, and then they rotate. Now, obviously, my fingers are too big for that, but I can pop out a little panel, and so I can rotate it, and then close that up again. Presto, gone. This might look complicated, and actually getting everything to fit nice and clean was not easy, but it's a simple mechanism. Whereas on the YF-22, the wheel sits here and then sort of folds up into the wing in a really complicated way. So this is actually, building the prototype is easier than building the production version. You heard it here first. And so I think that's a major difference that makes this easier. And in terms of the shape, a couple of things stand out. The cockpit canopy sits further aft on this, and the nose is longer. And so there are a lot of subtleties that become apparent if you look at it more closely. And we are sort of sufficiently nerdy about these things that we care, right?
That's why you've got all this display put together. That's fantastic.
The more detail we can cram in here, the happier we all get. And this is a little cheat.
I like the small little decals as well to just add those little details throughout the aircraft.
Oh yeah, okay. They tested two different engines on this. There were two YF-22s. They had engines by Pratt & Whitney or by General Electric. This is a General Electric version, so it has a General Electric logo on it. And these I know not everybody likes custom stickers. And my custom stickers often look a bit, I could probably pay more attention to them, but from a distance, if you don't zoom in too much, they look pretty much okay. And the overall look, I think, they do add to, I think, the attractiveness of the model.
Those subtle details that really kind of give it a more lifelike kind of look to it.
Yeah, I think so. So. I also totally get why people buy custom stickers and whatnot, because certainly for something like this, the large YF-22 lettering, that really stands out, and it's also not something that you can easily make brick build. Right? I prefer to make as much of the color scheme as I can using different colors, different colored elements. But these sort of text and little logos, they're too detailed and too finicky to be able to actually find a Lego equivalent. And so the color scheme, right, the dark gray and the light gray, that's all done using Lego. But the subtleties, yeah, I do use stickers for those. And no painting or gluing though, just.
There you go. Excellent work there. Fantastic.
You're not fed up with this yet?
No, not at all. And thank you for picking that up. I know it's always a little scary with a model like that.
It's scary. Yeah. Okay, so moving on. There's actually one of the engines for the YF-23 as well to add a little interest to the display. Then we go. This is a Russian experimental fighter. I think more or less intended as a counterpart for the F-22. It's called the Sukhoi S-37 or Sukhoi Su-47 Berkut, which is I think Russian for eagle. But I'm sure your commenters will correct me if I'm wrong. And this was designed in the 90s as a replacement for the Sukhoi 27 flanker, which is a famous fighter used by the Russian Air Force. And it has a really unusual configuration with the forward swept wings, which was intended to make it more maneuverable. It was a failure. As in, they flew. It flew several years for various types of tests, but the Russian Air Force never actually ended up buying them. And I think you can actually see in Google Earth, there's an airfield outside Moscow where they store some of their old prototypes, and you can see you can see the Su-47 parked there, looking very sorry for itself, sort of in the boneyard.
This is what you do for fun. You go on Google Earth and like look for aircraft prototype silhouettes.
Sure, and I mean, this is an easily recognizable silhouette, right? You don't need to be some super analyst to be able to recognize it with the wings pointing forward. There's only one, right? So it must be that one.
Was it a failure due to that kind of wing configuration,
No, I don't really know. I think they ran out of money, and maybe it didn't offer sufficient advantages over the Su-27 because there are more advanced versions of that now that probably offer a large part of the capability that this could have, but at a cheaper price. I don't know whether they're even still trying to market it. For years, you know, the Sukhoi, the design bureau, still sort of dragged it out to air shows, sort of pretending that this was an ongoing project. But yeah, in terms of the Lego model, I think it's fairly successful, although it's very fragile. So I'm not going to pick that one up.
It looks great though, and yeah, the black color scheme is very different than a lot of the other aircraft we see.
Sinister, right?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. I like that, and also the white accents and the red stars. They make it. Yeah, it's an interesting looking thing. So I built 11 models. So you know, it's gonna. We're almost at the end. That over there, the Canard fighter, that is a British Aerospace EAP, experimental aircraft program. It's a terrible name. I mean, whoever came up with that, they probably didn't have enough to drink before their meeting. But it was a technology demonstrator that was developed in the 80s for what ultimately became the Eurofighter Typhoon, which is a fighter that's in use with a number of European air forces and air forces in the Middle East. And it was a fun shape to build with a narrow nose, and then gradually widening for the engines at the rear, and also this I think it's called a cranked delta wing with a kink in the leading edge. Was a fun build, and also I like the color scheme with the white and the dark blue. Again, it's very different from the others. You can tell that this is a prototype. And
once again, having to tackle those very subtle kind of offsets as you gradually grow wider there towards the back.
Yeah, I think there are half plate offsets, which I do using small brackets. I don't know how we used to build before we had those. Yeah, there was a lot of trial and error in that, yeah, it turned out okay. I'm not a Technic builder, but I've done Technic. Ish. A couple of years ago, I got an email from John Schuster from Circuit Cubes. I don't know. Am I allowed to use product names in your?
Feel free.
And do you want to test some of our products? Sure. So what are these products? Well, they are small Lego compatible motors. The smallest one is the size of two 2x4 bricks on top of each other, and a battery box and controller, which is rechargeable, which is basically 4x4 studs by 2 bricks tall. So it's about half the size of an old 9-volt battery box that Lego used to make, and you can control it via Bluetooth, and you can hook the motors up to that control box, and you can have functionality in your model. At a much smaller scale than you'd be able to do with standard Lego motors. So that's their selling point. And I thought, well, okay, so they make small motors, right? So I'm going to build the smallest thing that I can with as many motors as I can fit in there. And that became this. This is an XV15 tilt rotor. This is a prototype not really prototype. This is the vehicle that was used to develop the technology for what later became the V-22 Osprey, which is an operational tilt rotor. And so this can take off like a helicopter with the propellers when the propellers are horizontal, like they are now. And then in flight, they can tilt forward, and it has wings, and then it can fly as an airplane. So it's an unusual concept. And well, here we go with the demonstrations again. Right. And mine works-ish. I mean, obviously it doesn't fly, sadly. And yeah, here we are. This is the app. And I can control motors individually. I can reorganize the controls for this. So I have controls to switch the motors on and off. And this controls their angle. Can't go lower than that, obviously, because then they would hit the table. But yeah, so
Very smooth, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it wasn't like that when I built the first version, and it wasn't like that when it came out of my suitcase. There was a bit of fiddling involved in getting it all back to work, but and this is fun at shows, right? People are looking at this and they see something move, and they always find that great. And for me, it was a fun challenge to actually build it, and I couldn't have built it using Lego motors. So
What was the name of that company? I don't think I'm familiar with that.
it's called Circuit Cubes, or at least that's the product. Maybe the company is called Tenka, I think. And yeah, you can buy them online via the company directly, but I think Amazon sells them as well. So the battery box is in the middle, and it comes with really thin wires that you can hook up to the motors. And it's not very expensive either. So, I mean, I got them free, but it's not very expensive. So if you want to motorize a small model, that's probably something that you know, if they are willing to look at a third-party accessory for their Lego, they might want to check it out. I've been very happy with it. I think I may have let John down a bit because he also asked, how do you feel about our lights? And he said, oh, you sent me lights. I didn't get any lights, so he sent me some lights, but that's 2 years ago, and I still haven't used them. Sorry, John.
Well, the motors look great here.
Yeah, thank you. I will do something with lights eventually. But okay, so I'll leave that running. Almost at the end, and actually at the beginning as well. So that plane over there, that is a Grumman X29. And that was here at Brick Fair in 2019, and this is pretty much the model that started the whole project. Joe Mino from Brick Journal, whom I've known for a few years, said in 2018, he said to me, Ralph, you know, you build all these airplanes, but one really neat one that you haven't built yet is the X29. You should really build an X29. And I said, oh, sure, you know, I'll build you an X29, and while I'm at it, I'll make it studless and minifig scale. You know. And he said, yeah, and while you're doing that, write an article for Brick Journal for me. I went, okay, so I did. I brought it to Brick Fair in 2019, and when we had the Cold War collaboration, that was sort of fitting for the Cold War collaboration because it's a Cold War prototype to test the technology of these forward swept wings that you saw on the Su-24. 47 earlier, but this is an American jet, and it started our discussions in 2019. What are we going to do? Oh, that sort of experimental thing is really cool. So let's do that. So it's my final model in this display, but it's the first one that I built, and it's the only time I've actually taken a model to the same show twice.
We'll allow it.
Okay, thank you. And it's a pretty shape, I think.
Yeah, and once again, those kind of like decals add some nice details to it.
Yeah, I really would have loved to do that using plates, but yeah, not a chance. The shape is too complicated to be able to do that with the curves on the side and the tapering of the nose, and the sort of curves of the lines on top of the wings. Yeah, that's not a chance. So and there, you know, this model is now 5 years old. They've held up. So yeah, that's the experimental military collaboration.
Excellent work here. Everyone did an amazing job, and I really appreciate you and everyone else taking the time to take us through all these, because there's some really incredible work here, and the collabs that you guys have done over the years at Brick Fair are just amazing. So keep it up. Can't wait to see what you do in the future.
Appreciate it. Maybe something small, you know. That's but yeah, no, I'm so happy that after all of these years, it came together. Right, and when we set it up on Wednesday and on Thursday morning, I've just been sort of walking back and forth and just looking at everything and thinking, wow, we actually pulled this off, and they're all great. And it's also, I mean, most of us have been friends for years, and it's also really nice to see everybody again and to do something collaboratively. So yeah, very, very cool.
Fantastic. Glad you could make it back over here, and like I said, I'm sure you'll have more awesome stuff for us in the future, so can't wait.
I look forward to it. Thank you very much.